Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to Software Velocity podcast series. I am your host and CTO of Software Velocity Partners, Steve Helzel. So today's topic is technical debt and generative AI's impact on early stage companies. And joining me today is Rob Strechay, founder of Smugget Consulting. He's guest host of SiliconANGLE's theCUBE, and someone who's run product at big companies and has built many startups for the past few decades. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Steve. It's a lot of fun to be here, and this is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. So I'm really excited to get into the topic and kind of share my thoughts over the years, especially with, like you were talking about in my intro there, the big companies and the small companies and what they have to deal with, especially as they get funded and on the small side, and when they're looking to drive profits at the large side. So it'll be fun.
Yeah, that's great. Let me set some context for everybody, and then we'll get into some of the questions I have for you. Early stage companies are under extreme pressure to deliver unfinished products, MVP, features to market for financial reasons. And that thrusts them into technical debt. I mean, it slows down the development, the delivery, it impacts and lowers revenue, it impacts profitability. Eventually their ability to pivot and sell the company at expected valuations are also impacted by technical debt. And now you got ChatGPT and LLMs are throwing a wild card into this mix. Companies are clamoring to build this capability without realizing how premature it still is. And they don't understand the impact on the technical debt that they're creating. But one of the critical things that you pointed out, Rob, was the privacy impact. They don't understand how much this can impact privacy and security reasons. So Rob and I will also talk about ways to avoid this massive buildup of technical debt. And without further ado, just one quick thing on logistics for those folks who are in the audience. If you have any comments, or questions, put it into the comments section. I will see them and we'll try to get to them by the end of this, event. And if we don't get a chance to answer them live, I'll make sure that we get back to you and send you answers. So with that, Rob, my first question to you is, I know you look at these companies from all angles, from product, but you also look at them from a financial standpoint because of the investment that companies need to look at. So can you first give us some context about, what are like the financial factors and KPIs that investors like equity firms and VCs use to drive their portfolios?
Yeah, no, I think it's that was a great intro. I think it really has shifted where most everybody, they're looking at SaaS related statistics and KPIs that drive those companies. So they're trying to figure out, what's your ARR, how much churn do you have, what is your NRR, so net recurring revenue on top of annual recurring revenue. And net recurring revenue is, okay, I need this percentage to be higher than 100%, which means I'm growing. If you're below 100%, it means you're actually shrinking and it's costing you more to even retain. So I think a lot of the VCs and I would say private equity partners are trying to understand what is the health of the company by looking at a number of these different things. I think where it becomes extremely hard is the fact that if you have 5 customers, these KPIs really don't apply to you at the super small end when you're getting your first set of funding. When you start to grow and you have 100 customers, how representative are those 100 customers to your ongoing endeavors? And I think that becomes a really interesting mix of KPIs when they start to look at it. And to your point, sometimes it puts pressure on those organizations to do unnatural things around their product and how they're going to really, get to the next version, what the next version should look like. And I'd say that, having been at Amazon's AWS, building out a team there, building out product, and you start to look at, where some of this pressure came from, it is really from the big tech companies and how they've built out. Amazon is extremely, I'd say, proud of the way that they do development, in the fact that they have 2 pizza teams when they start out. 2 pizza teams, about 8 people. Each person gets 2 slices of pizza, apparently. I was always more hungry than that, which is the kind of running joke. I'm not exactly a skinny guy. So you start to look at it and go, okay, yeah, you start out with the 8 people, you start to build your product set and your stack, and each team can go and build their own stack. But what happens is you start to build and you build and you build, and you get your MVP, or as I like to call it, your MLP, your minimally lovable product, out the door, and you start to then get customers on it. Okay, now what? And I think that really, when you start to look at it, VCs and equity partners are saying, well, how fast can you get to market? And then let's just iterate from there. And I think that sometimes that forces, I'd say, entrepreneurs to go and make some, calculated risks in how they develop their product, what features they put in, what stack they build upon, which definitely, can cause some issues to the KPIs long term. And I think in particular, it's the net recurring revenue one, is the one where this shows up the most, because if people are having a bad experience, and I'm not just talking, CX and UX, I'm talking like the product doesn't hit all the feature set that they're looking for, and they're not willing to continue on the ride with you because they don't see you going that direction, then your NRR really suffers.
Yeah. I totally see that as well. And the question really comes down to, you know, um, while there's a lot of pressure from the investors to get to push features out, isn't some of the onus onto the C-suite and the leaders to, you said making smart choices, but a lot of times they just overlook these things and try to just get product out. One area that I see missing in early stage companies and companies that are really trying to position themselves to be bought is they underinvest in test automation, and really that's kind of your defense system for growing technical debt.
Yeah.
And if you skimp on that, it just accelerates your tech debt in a number of different ways. Isn't it? But back to the question is, isn't the onus on some of those leaders to make that visible to the investors? And what have you seen?
Yeah, I think it is one of the things that gets hidden, right? Because you don't want to say, hey, we kind of made a bad choice, early on when we were going, as we would say here in Massachusetts, wicked fast to get something out. But
Right.
it becomes a lot of times not until you get to a certain scale or size where it starts to impact, do they start to then take a step back and go, and like you said, in the C-suite, and start to have those conversations. I've been a part of multiple conversations with multiple companies where it's, hey, we went really fast. We made these kinds of decisions at the time. They seemed like the right decisions. We built in some tech debt pretty deep into the product. And now it's going to take us 3 years to get rid of that, unless we're going to stop all development on everything else for the next, 8 to 10 months. So I think it becomes how your velocity gets impacted longer term into that. And this then becomes again, back to the KPIs, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in NRR in particular, where if you start to build up the tech debt, then you start to look at it and go, okay, if I apply, and I kind of looked at it as, there's 25%, 33% or 30% of your development budget goes to things that you have to go fix, things under the hoods, decisions you made like tech debt and previous. Then you look at it and you have your middle kind of 30% where it's, here's things that customers asked for. So this is backlog that's coming in. We're working backwards, existing customers. And then you look at it 30% as new feature sets and, sexy widgets for marketing to go talk about to analysts and things of that nature. If you look at that 30, 30, 30, and then you got an extra 10% that you can lop on somewhere else. Far too often, you're seeing people having to make that decision where it's 40 or 50% in that first column dealing with tech debt and saying, okay, I'm going to skinny down this to 25 and 25, or maybe even lower on the stuff that customers are asking for because they're bought in and they're looking at the shiny new features out to the side and they're fine with that. So I think to your point, it should be the C-suite who's saying to the VC, hey, we're spending, 50% of our engineering budget on here. And I think right now, especially in the economy we're in, I think you're seeing that with AI and the push for companies to say, hey, how are you doing AI now from their investors? I can imagine some of the discussions that and have been privy to some discussions that are going on in these companies that says, hey, we're gonna really focus more on the shiny new features over here and less on the tech debt over here, just for X amount of months because we need to get to the shiny new AI feature that we're looking at.
Right. And then we'll get to that one in a second. So what basically summarizing what you're saying is companies really need to think about their balance of new content, new features versus tech debt, and make it visible that this is part of really development. What I've always seen is they've looked at test and tech debt as a cost center and an afterthought.
Yeah.
And when you look at it that way, then you never catch up. And when it goes to pivoting or trying to get an evaluation, your velocity gets impacted, your quality gets impacted, your investors get disinterested because you can't pump out features and functions as fast as they want. They can't sell at the price that they're looking at. So it becomes a snowball effect.
Yeah.
So what you said before is, besides being wicked fast, you have to be wicked good,
Yeah. And I think you hit on a good point with the how it actually adds costs longer term. And then because you go, again, I've been through this multiple times with multiple startups and big companies for that matter. And you start to look at it, and I think you hit on the pricing aspect. We're not getting the pricing that we want, or we're not getting the margin that we expect out of it. Right. So now we have to extend our financial runway from a venture or equity perspective. And I think it does come back to really, I don't want to say haunt them, but it makes you make decisions later on that maybe you didn't want to be in the position to have to go to make. And I think that's the key, is that, having test early on and good test suites, and everybody talks about shift left of security. I kind of look at as, shift left of testing as well, and having good integrated testing is key. Multiple places I've been, it's just not common to have really good test suites. I've seen it done a couple good times, but it's very rare that you have it, a full thorough job done on exercising the code.
We could have a whole other session on that, but I know this is not your topic. Yeah. But having a good test strategy, depending on the journey of your company, is very important, because when you're not an enterprise, we understand that. So you're not going to build all of the test strategies and test automation for every step of the way. You're going to build what's most pragmatic and what's important to you, knowing that stuff that more advanced can come later. But as long as you do like the customer centric testing, that's probably good enough. But again, like I said, longer session that I could go into multiple angles on. So now let's fast forward a little bit, because now you have all of this. You have the normal tech debt that's going on, and now you have generative AI, LLMs, and other advanced AI and ML type of content coming in, and companies are scrambling. It's the disruption that's going on right now. I'm looking at it from a number of angles, but I'd like to hear your angle. Like first, let's talk about your angle on it, what you think about it, and then talk about how this is going to impact technical debt.
Yeah, I think it's going to have a huge impact. I think that, in fact, I was out at the Open Source Summit in Vancouver last week with the Linux Foundation, and I got to talk to a whole number of people on the record and off the record on theCUBE. And in some of the interviews, and even some of the more important discussions off air, the generative AI and generative AI for code is kind of really in its infancy, and I think it's really neat. It has a super huge potential, but what we said, and I think we had a couple of really great guests on, as well as some of the thinking that I had been doing, is that it's a great tool, but it's not going to replace the people, and it can't replace really good testing of the code. In particular, maybe it'll even help. So I don't know if you hear me. You came through the static for the last minute. It's not coming through on my side. No, I can't. It's still coming through. I don't.
Okay, how's that?
There you go.
I just changed my microphone.
Yeah.
The beauty of having multiple microphones there.
Yeah. So, I don't know if it recorded that way or went live that way, but we'll see after the fact.
Oh no, I'm sure. I think it seems to only happen temporarily once in a while. I think we were good for until that last moment. So
correct.
let's go back to that. Let me go back and repeat that just so that we have.
Yeah,
We started talking about how generative AI and LLMs would impact the development of content, right? Right. Everyone's clamoring and afraid that it's going to overtake developers.
right.
And I was looking at it as, hey, let's use this to augment what developers do and improve what they do, improve their velocity, improve their quality. And then I was given an example of how I used to test storage devices and storage controllers. We used to take the controller and turn it around and make it the host, like it's simulating the host, because it could drive the controller faster than any host could possibly do it. And so the similar analogy is using LLMs and generative AI, make it the driver of the downstream activities to improve test automation, creation of test automation, and improve test coverage, improve your DevOps automation, improve your ML ops automation, improve your repetitive running of doing test data generation, like repetitive things that need lots of compute that you can give it some instructions to learn how to scale those things and go very fast, is going to absolutely change the downstream activities of software development and integration with GAI. And I wanted to get your thoughts on all of that.
Totally agree. And I think again, it's a tool, right? It's a tool like anything else, and I think we talked about it. In fact, I talked about it at KubeCon and Cloud Native Con in Amsterdam a couple of weeks ago, up in Vancouver at the Open Source Summit. It has the potential where you're using generative AI to create the actual code, to actually create code pollution. And I think that's the scary part, is that even if you go and look at Copilot, well, where is Copilot getting its code from? It's looking at a whole bunch of Apache 2 open source type of code and bringing it in. What if it brings in a 0-day? How do you
Mm-hmm.
know? How do you know what code it's bringing in, from where and when? And again, I'm not saying they're doing that on purpose or anything like that. It's just
Right.
the nature of the beast today, of where the tool is at. If you don't go and test the code yourself, if you do not go and have somebody look at it, you could also end up with some highly inefficient code as well. So I think, like you said, turning AI back on itself to a certain extent makes a lot of sense, where you can maybe to even, like you said, create test plans you didn't even think about, or code coverage you didn't even think about, which could be really interesting.
Yeah. So as this is, like technical debt, this, when, like you said, there's so many uh, areas that are, well, the blind spots, basically, right? The people are not thinking about all of the what code it could bring in. Like you said, day zero issues, security vulnerabilities. It's like when you're using third party libraries in general, it's like it's using them but on steroids, right? It's
Yeah.
it's 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 much greater. So, any suggestions on how to make those blind spots more visible?
I think it again, it comes down to really understanding what you're trying to achieve, the timeframes you're trying to achieve them, and putting in enough guardrails around it within your own company. I think, to the earlier comment about public LLMs, I would not be putting anything in a public LLM that is intellectual property of my own. And I think you need to be super careful about how you do it. I also think that the IP that gets put into these LLMs is IP that you want to own as a company. So I think, to your point, I think uh, I would not ignore them, and I would not ignore AI in general. I would look to understand what can it do for you. There are a number of different companies in the space going after it and building tooling to help turn AI back on itself, to do sign up kind of some of the code review or security reviews. And I talked to a number of them last week that I think you're gonna see that this is really just the beginning. We're in the early days of these being production. The cost of doing it is massive as well. I think it's somebody was quoting that it's $700,000 a day for Chat GPT to run their LLM. And I mean, you go out every day of the year. That's just a massive amount of money just to run it.
Right.
And that's not talking about what it took to train it to get to this point and how it's training itself as it starts to bring in more data as they keep training it. The cost, there's I think a big cost to that. So it's kind of one of those, as we were talking about earlier, you got to be careful how much you bring in from an AI perspective, because you can bring in a lot really fast, and then how you actually make sure you're not injecting tech debt so deeply into the product that you're going to be sitting there trying to figure it out for years. I mean, I've been places where we had a multi-year plan for getting rid of tech debt, and a lot of that stemmed from the fact that we really had no good testing when I got there. And it was, okay, let's take a break. Let's take a couple months and figure out how we put better testing and better processes in place. Then let's start to move. And I think that's where, maybe that's where AI can come in, is helping. Hey, we know we have tech debt. Maybe we build our own code repositories that have our own generative AI on top of it. Or we use somebody's package that's secure and not public, and we look at how we can, do reviews of it in a faster way.
Right. Basically bring it in, bring that in house. Bring an instance in house, so you don't have to expose it to the public. I think you're spot. Basically, what you're saying is okay. Don't ignore generative AI. Look at it as, how can we help? How can this help deliver better quality products faster with less technical debt? Go in with your eyes wide open and understand that it's not a small undertaking, no matter how you look at it. And so it's really up to the C-suite, the technical leaders, to say, look, this can't be ignored. However, we need to proceed with caution. It will cost a lot more than you think it will cost.
Right.
But the ROI should really pay off, because it'll set us apart from everybody else.
Yeah. And I think a good way to look at it, just look at the security model and the fact that, a scanner is just a scanner, right? It does not fix anything for you. It does not do anything. It will tell you and point out what some of your vulnerabilities are. But if you can't then go back and fix those vulnerabilities, or you don't catch them early enough, you're spending a lot of time. I think Log4j taught us that, hey, everybody's using open source. Open source is one. It moves incredibly quickly. But how do you do it in a way that is controllable, and that you don't end up with a way that you've built your stack out that it becomes the next Log4j, and there will be another one. I mean, there's no doubt. How do you get and make sure that you're componentized in the right way, that you have microservices built? How do you test those microservices? If one team over here is building a microservice and this one over here, and they're communicating through APIs, how do you make sure there's no regression in the APIs? I mean, all of this, how do we go fast? How do we be decoupled from the people? How do we build out and componentize systems? Really takes having a mature set of processes from a test dev perspective that has shifted left and has really, uses tooling to augment the people in the situation. And I think that's going to be the key, is how people use the different testing tooling that they already have, as well as what comes from generative AI. Because I mean, generative AI right now is maybe a junior dev. Maybe you can put it to the, some of the people even smarter than me were saying maybe it's a person who's got a year's experience outside of college, and that maybe it can give you that much value.
Yeah, and if I heard the same thing with CTOs that I speak with. Um, they're cautious about this. They're looking at it in the way I'm trying to look at it as well, which is help augment but not replace. And maybe some of the things that are more repetitive can be done in those fashions, but for the most part, it's got a long ways to go.
Yeah, yeah, and I think again, I think it'll get better every year. I mean, but I think it also, if you look at it and go, and we've all seen the memes around Chat GPT giving you the wrong answer, and I've used it and looked at it just on subjects that I knew the answers to, and it gives me it's really good at giving me what sounds like an authoritative answer on something it really got wrong, and that's so it all depends on how you train it, where the training has come from, what's the base foundational model, how big is it, and I think it'll get better over time. And I think as we all learn to adopt it, I think in how these models work, and we learn how the models work, which even Chat GPT and OpenAI doesn't know how Chat GPT-4 works. They're using Chat GPT-4 on Chat GPT-2 to figure out how Chat GPT-2 worked. And so I think I mean, again, but that's a great thing. Hey, we're
Right.
using AI
Yep.
to help us do and understand something that one person's not going to be able to wrap their hand around. I mean, it's not like data science, all of a sudden AI came out of nowhere. It's
Yeah.
been there. It's just now we have a prompt, and
Right.
everybody's
It,
got
it,
at it.
it basically it's gone into the mainstream is what it's really has, and it's really disruptive.
Correct.
Um, I think one sort of question, maybe more final question for you is really about how do you think all of this will impact valuations of these companies? Because it's on one hand, it can make the evaluation go extremely large, but if they're not dealing with their technical debt, it could also, how,
Yeah.
how does that get thrown into the mix of valuation? And should companies that are doing due diligence really be trying to flush that out as well during that assessment?
Yeah, and having been at big companies and done, I guess you could say, the A and M&A over some organizations, and you have to look and do code reviews. And code reviews were 3 days on Zoom, going through with experts and people digging into the code and code repositories and making sure there was make sure the people who were doing the code reviews were not then involved in any of the future development if the acquisition didn't go through, and it hurt the valuation of a number of companies. As we go in and go, listen, we look at what they've written and go, it's the amount of tech debt there is so much that we're going to have to throw their entire code base out. Maybe we can use it as a reference architecture, or kind of a reference guide for what we build next, but it's the code itself is not as valuable as is. So what that does is it lowers the valuation, because now I have to figure out, do I have enough people and at an architecture level that says, hey, we can go rewrite this, and we can rewrite it in what time frame to hit the numbers that I sold to the CEO of whatever company I was at. And I think that's the same thing with the PE,
Right.
where I look at that, or even VCs that are getting into kind of the PE space and looking at it and going, okay, if I'm going to get involved in this, how much tech debt is really there? Because it impacts the velocity of the new feature sets, of really customer engagement, And it kills. I mean, it can be a valuation killer. I've seen valuations go from 20 million to one
Yeah.
in the span of a 3-day audit, and you're sitting there going, okay, it's going to take us an extra 6 months or an extra year to get to MLP or MVP, because we have to go rewrite this massive section of code that just isn't cloud native, or doesn't have the right services, or isn't abstractable enough to go and run in a certain place. So
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I've been involved in a number of post-acquisition integration projects,
yeah,
and when I do the first level of assessment and bring that back and have to tell the acquirer how
yeah.
ugly their baby is, it's not a very good conversation, you know.
Yeah, and I think that's the key. Is, again, nobody wants to do that, and you feel bad when you're the acquirer and you're sitting there having these conversations. It's hard conversations to have, and I think it's having been on both sides of the fence for that, and I think it's one of those that I you got to have to admit you have a problem before you can solve the problem, and I think that's the key.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think they get surprised by the amount, because it usually doesn't get flushed out until they're trying to do a new feature, or they're trying to integrate with the acquiring company,
Yeah,
and then they realize, it's not going to be a 6 month integration. It's going to be like 12 to 18 months, and that's not what they were expecting. They were expecting
yeah.
to turn revenue pretty quickly, and um,
Yeah,
surprise.
yeah.
You know?
And I think it also goes back to the policies and procedures that they have internally. And again, I'm not talking like big P, it's little p, how you shift left, how the development organization works, and how part of it's the people integration as well as the technology integration on the dev and the test, and how the security side of things as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, great, great. Listen, I think we could probably go on and on for forever on this topic. We've got lots of background and examples and history, but I think why don't you if you have anything to wrap up and summarize, and then I'll do the same, and then I'll go look, see if there's any questions in the comment section, and see where we go from there.
Sounds good. Yeah, I think again, it's what we've been highlighting. AI, is here. Open source is here. Open source one, and both of them coming together can really create a lot of code pollution very quickly. It's not. Don't see AI as a bad thing, like replacing people. I think that's kind of a overstated fear. I think there will be industries that it does. Uh, Go significantly deeper, but I think in code and tech in particular, I think it'll be a great tool to help people not only create the code, but then validate the code longer term, and it's get familiar with it. And it still has to be like any other tool. If you don't have the processes to wrap around the tool, it's just a tool unto itself. And if you don't use it right, or don't have it integrated right, you're going to create more problems than you're going to solve.
Uh, Completely agree. Completely agree. And then I think there's a couple themes of balancing your tech debt with your forward velocity. There's the providing visibility that tech debt is it's a beast that you need to deal with, and it should be made visible to your investors to say, look, this should not be, if we cut corners, there's a price to pay. If we do a proper balance, there'll be less to pay. We'll get a good velocity, we'll get good quality, we'll get customer adoption quicker, we'll get feedback quicker, we'll get revenue quicker. Um, and so, and that all means that, making test, DevOps, ML ops, all of that has to be part of development, not your afterthought cost center, you
Yeah.
know. So good topic. Really appreciate you joining me today on in this series, and maybe we'll get to do this again another time soon. Thank you
Sounds
so
good.
much. Bye now. Thanks, everybody.